and the tariff on the front door of his apartment. Michael Thompson immediately sensed something amiss. Things were strangely scattered, although his wife is pedantically neat. There were some very strange noises coming from the bedroom. Michael had come from a business trip that had already lasted 2 weeks, and he would be gone for another. It so happened that he had to spend New Year's Eve far away from his home in a small town called Anadar, which few people know about. The location of this place is amazing. It's the easternmost city in Russia. Permafrost, remoteness from transportation arteries, all this did not favor Michael to mosey back there. The journey took almost 24 hours, not to mention it was extremely tiring, not the cheapest pleasure. Business demanded that the very important, expensive cargo that would arrive at the port of Anadar be properly inspected. Thompson did not want to take any risks and decided to go and do the preparatory work first, and then the acceptance. But as it turned out, the cargo ship was delayed for several days due to meteorological conditions. And then the traditional holidays began. And even for additional remuneration, nobody would work in the first days of the new year. All of this inevitably led Michael to the conclusion that it was inappropriate and too tiring to return home for the holidays. When Michael told his wife Camille about all this, she was furious. For a long time she had suspected him of cheating, although, what is to say, she knew for sure and reproached him with it. Spouse several times was close to filing for divorce, because the evidence of adultery was present unequivocal. At first it was just a forgotten lipstick in the car, to which one could turn a blind eye. But then the girl called Camille and folded with all the details of their relationship with Michael. Despite the fact that the spouse, it is true, was not in favor of monogamy and moral, his appearance, in this sense, limping on both legs, his wife he loved very much. That is why, having gathered his will in a fist, realizing that he was very guilty before Camille, he decided to come home, even for a few days, despite all the difficulties associated with it. To be frank, he was very embarrassed that, having learned about the imminent extension of the business trip, his wife at first shouted, made claims and hurled accusations at him, but then suddenly calmed down. Just a couple of 3 days before the new year they talked on the phone, and Camille already as if humbly accepted the situation and even calmed Michael himself when he returned and regretted what had happened. It wasn't like typical spouse behavior. Not at all. A sense of guilt towards his wife for all the wrongs in the marriage. But in no small part, and this wariness of her behavior and led to the fact that at lunchtime on December 30th Michael arrived at the airport to be home by the evening of December 31st and make a gift to his wife. But unfortunately the flight was delayed due to weather conditions. The far north is full of such surprises of nature, and everything was not smooth at the connection in the central part of Russia. Michael was nervous that he would meet the new year in an airplane, airport or cab, and Camille would be alone under the chimes. But it was impossible to change anything. Arriving at his driveway only at 3 o'clock in the morning, Michael, tired, quickly climbed the stairs to please his wife, who had to sit alone in front of the TV. He was carrying flowers, and in the pocket of his coat was a beautiful velvet box, a real holiday present. When Michael opened the door with his key, he was alarmed. The light was off in the hallway, the living room was empty and dark. From under the door of the couple's bedroom there is a streak of light, strange sounds like crying, and a voice whispering something as if to soothe the crying. 2 in the bedroom. These thoughts whirled through his head. Shock and arousal came over the man. Quietly opening the bedroom door, he froze in shock at what he saw. His wife was holding a newborn baby in her arms who was crying, believing, living, nomadic and toddler, whispering something to soothe him as his wife stood half-turned towards the door. She immediately noticed her husband entering the room. Apparently, when she turned around at the extraneous sounds and saw the man, she was stunned with horror and changed in her face. Camille that this was a stupid and rhetorical question. But what else to expect from a person who is in shock, who has not slept for more than a day and a half, and in the last 3 minutes has experienced the full range of negative emotions available to man? The wife, still reeling from the shock, remained silent. Where had the child come from? Michael did not understand at all what to do in the situation and how to react to it. There were a lot of questions. He did not even have time to formulate them in his head. He wanted to ask them all at once. But given his wife's reaction, that would only put her more in a state of prostration. "Camille, can you please explain to me what's going on here? We had it slipped under the door. You could see how difficult it was for the wife to say the words and how hard it was for her to squeeze out every sound. "Why is he here? Why didn't you say anything to me?" Although he realized that the pressure was only making things worse, he couldn't help himself. His spouse, continuing to pump out the child who was just beginning to calm down, sat down in the chair. Getting information from her would be difficult given her shocked state, pondered Michael. It took almost two for her husband to get some information that he could piece together. It turned out that someone had called on the landline on December 29th. The wife picked up the phone, but all she heard was silence. And then the caller connected. Not 10 minutes later, the front doorbell rang. The wife walked over and turned on the video peephole. At first she couldn't see anything, and then she heard crying. And when she lowered her eyes to the floor, she found a basket in which something was moving. The characteristic crying left no doubt that there was a baby in the basket. A very tiny baby. Reflexively giving in to instinct, the woman opened the door and took the basket. As she told her husband later, she naturally wanted to go to law enforcement to call someone. But the baby was crying a lot. And first Camille decided to pump him out and see what was bothering him, whether you realize it or not. "I took him in my arms and realized I couldn't give him to anyone," cried the unhappy woman, trying later to explain herself to her husband. To Michael, it was all nonsense. He didn't understand at all the emotions that had taken hold of his wife when she took another man's child in her arms. Yes, they didn't have children with her. Or rather, they didn't now. But what did a stranger's foundling have to do with it? The story of their family and their attempts to become parents is sad and sad. When Michael met his future wife, she was a second-year economics student. He himself led her seminars and classes as a graduate student. At first, their relationship did not go beyond business communication, but gradually the pretty girl won his heart. The romance was stormy and even threatened Michael's defense of his PhD thesis, but the department eventually decided that the case is young. The difference in age is not large, and it was decided to simply shield the young researcher from teaching. But Michael did not ruin his career as a scientist, and immediately after the defense, having received the title of candidate of economic sciences, decided to go into business. By the time of graduation, Michael was already quite well on his feet and decided to get married. He proposed marriage to Camille. At first, he looked at the institution of marriage quite pragmatically. A pretty, smart girl, from a good family, educated, then a bad party. That was pretty much what Michael was all about at the time. He was perfectly able to cut off his emotions and always relied on cold calculation. For the completeness of the picture, which saw the man, lacked only a couple of kids, with whom would be taken care of by his wife, so as not to take much interest in the absences and business trips of her husband. And in general, it is not particularly decent when a man who placed the fourth 10 did not have a wife and children raises questions. So reasoned Michael. Such cynical reflections in his head did not interfere in any way with the sincere feeling of affection, habit, and even love for Camille. At the family council, as it was called, although everything was decided, of course, by the husband, it was decided to have heirs as soon as possible. Here the wishes of the couple were in perfect harmony. Despite the differences in motivation, Camille loved her husband very much and was brought up in such a way that she did not doubt the main thing: women. To be the keeper of the family hearth. And the main interests in a woman's life are her children and her husband. That is why it was so difficult for her to survive the diagnosis that was made by a gynecologist, to whom the couple turned after a year of unsuccessful attempts to get pregnant on their own. The diagnosis implied the possibility of carrying a child on her own and a resolution, but ruled out the possibility of independent conception. Camille was greatly affected by this information and even became depressed. Only taking care of herself in order to enter the IVF protocol made Camille pull herself together and come to her senses. Difficult, but not impossible, she reassured herself. Only the woman's optimism and endless desire to become a mom helped the woman go through hell through 7 protocols of shots in the stomach, endless tests, ultrasounds, examinations. In fact, she lived in hospitals. Each failed attempt, when the pregnancy did not come, drove the woman to nervous exhaustion. And just the thought that she should try again and again, that her wish would come true, just have to keep knocking on that closed door, helped her each time to get out of bed and keep fighting. The treatment for the failed attempt took almost 9 years. That did not stop Camille. Like a tank, she marched toward her goal, despite the fact that each subsequent protocol became increasingly difficult for her body. Between programs, she had to lie in hospital and recover. But the woman, who was soft and calm in life, was as solid as a rock in this matter. She saw the goal and saw no obstacles. Michael was tired of fighting with this manic passion and let everything go, deciding that whatever the child is, as long as not to hang. Figure of speech in this case is not so figurative. The desire and inability to conceive a child drove the woman to extreme states of severe depression, and hope spiritualized lifted all vitality. That was why he decided to wave his hand and stay out of the way, stay out of her way. He too wanted to be a father, wanted to have an heir, his blood and flesh, but not so much incomparable to Camille's desperate need to become a mother. But he loved his wife, at least in the way he envisioned that love, so he meekly went about his wife's business. In fact, his interference in the matter was only material. Unexpectedly, it seemed that even to the fertility doctor who was in charge of the couple, Camille became pregnant. The woman's happiness was unbounded. She was flying with joy on wings despite all the hardships of pregnancy she was experiencing. And, unfortunately, almost all the negative symptoms of pregnancy. The woman went through edema, toxemia, heartburn, terrible headaches, and high blood pressure. The list seemed to be exhausted only by a medical reference book. But to her, none of it mattered. No matter, in the key of her well-being, she was concerned about whether the child, almost the entire pregnancy Camille spent in the hospital in the pathology department. The doctors feared for the mother's health. The body was extremely tired from the abuse she had undergone on the way to the pregnancy itself. And the strength that the child took away, and how the whole body mobilized for its nurturing, took a toll on her. Camille didn't seem to notice it at all. She was focused on the baby, constantly talking to him, reading to him, putting on classical music, eating only the food allowed according to all doctors' recommendations, walking. If she couldn't walk on her own, she asked me to drive her in a chair to breathe fresh air. Pregnancy yoga, and of course pregnancy classes. More disciplined. A mommy is just hard to imagine. In this situation, Michael showed himself to be at his best. Almost every day he visited his wife in the hospital, brought all the necessary things, and pleased with excesses. He tried to fulfill all requests and be a caring husband. Unprecedented, but he even agreed to take a course to take care of the newborn. There are only a few classes for my dad, but he attended them honestly, listened attentively, and memorized them. He even asked clarifying questions. In general, tried to protect his wife and make her life more simple and comfortable. And when the ultrasound, they announced that they would have a son. The joy of the couple could not be described in words. Son, I will have a son. Michael, to be honest, didn't believe it anymore. To be more precise, he had forbidden himself to dream about it, so as not to be disappointed. Camille seemed to be at the peak of happiness. A healthy son. Naturally, the day of their baby's birth should have been the happiest day of their lives. Unfortunately, in reality, this was not destined to happen. Initially, everything was going just fine. The woman in labor was shown a natural birth, resolution, and in this sense, there were no complications for either the mother or the newborn. After the birth, Camille saw her son. She had him placed on her breast for a few minutes, because at first no abnormalities were visible. But on closer inspection, the doctor did not at a push call out something. Camille could not make it out. Almost immediately, scales were brought and the baby was taken away. The first few hours, moms were calmed, said that it was a routine examination and that soon the baby would be brought to her for feeding. Surely the mother's heart felt that something was wrong. She did not like the expression on the doctor's face. It was too concerned. After 4 of being alone in the postpartum ward, the woman, barely containing her hysterics and panic attacks, decided to go on her own to the neonatal intensive care unit to figure things out and see her son. The plan was only good in the mind of the powerless and exhausted woman. The labor was not severe, but the woman in labor still had to be stitched up. And in principle, childbirth is an extremely labor-intensive process for the body of any woman. It is not supposed to be followed by physical activity. Camille didn't care about herself once again. A nurse passing by the room found the woman unconscious in the doorway, deep fainting. The stitches had to be restitched because they came apart, the first to know that their son had died. Michael was summoned by the head of the department and invited to his office. It was a blow. The man cried. Despite the shock, at the same time, he quickly realized that he had no time for pity for his son and himself. The most important thing was his wife. It was completely incomprehensible how she would survive this. We made a joint decision that it would be better to inform a psychologist. Michael just did not know how to say it at all. Besides, he would be the one to bring his wife to her senses afterwards and organize the funeral. Intrauterine pneumonia, 2 words that divided the life of an unfortunate woman into before and after. To describe in words the grief of a mother who has lost her child is an unimaginable task. About a mother who had done so much, gone through so much to conceive, to carry this child at the suggestion of a maternity hospital psychologist who unfortunately had to face similar situations. Camille was sent to a rehabilitation center. The funeral, this horrible little robbery, almost drove the woman completely insane. Her psyche just had to be supported, helped to cope with her condition. For more than 3 months, the unfortunate woman was in treatment. There was both therapy and medication. A variety of new techniques were also applied. These both helped and did not. As Michael explained, the chief physician of the institution, please understand, we did on our part everything we could. Camille was brought in critical condition. There is no threat to her mental health right now. But as she told her therapist in another session, everything inside me is dead. That's how the patient feels, empty. We can continue the treatment, but I don't see the point, as no one can help her fill herself up again, except herself. Isn't it dangerous to take her home? Michael has been very worried, literally unable to find a place for himself, much less those around him. Camille is not dangerous. It's just the biggest grief of any woman's life. The meaning of life for her is now lost, and she herself must find it again. Of course, outpatient sessions with a psychotherapist should continue. Believe my professional experience, to find what has been lost, to find purpose. Life has regained value for her. She needs to get out into the world, as hard as that's going to be. And it's going to be hard for you. Michael himself barely made it out without falling into a serious condition, as did his wife. He was distracted by the fact that his wife needed care and support, and work. Business at that time required personal presence. In general, as during the pregnancy, the husband behaved in such a way that there was nothing to reproach him for. He did everything he could, everything that depended on him, from the basic payment, the treatment itself in the elite and best center of the region, to the constant calls, messages, and visits. Michael was immersed in the treatment, also coming to the couple's sessions of the therapist, willing to fulfill his wife's every wish and whim. But the trouble was, she wanted nothing more. Camille returned home, continued to go to sessions 3 times a week, and visited her son's grave every week. It seemed from the outside that her life had come to a standstill. She quietly became a function, just doing what was necessary, what was required of her. But inside, as she succinctly put it at the time, she was dead. All that was left of the woman was the outer shell. And if before she helped her to get up and continue the fight, thought that she will achieve her goal and become a mom. But now such thoughts did not even visit her head. Children were never spoken of again. Psychotherapists forbade Michael to speak on the subject unless his wife herself started the conversation. And she didn't. Silent, because she realized that there are more failures and even more losses. She couldn't cope. Risk she no longer wanted and could not. So they lived on. A superfluous time does not talk on topics that are painful for both of them, and in general, in fact, not talking. Camille had built this wall herself, and Michael was afraid to go over it. He did not know what his wife had erected behind this wall, and he did not dare to look behind it, much less ruin the grief he had experienced. The estrangement of the spouses from each other led Michael to another barmaid, to which he became strongly involved. Whereas his previous girlfriends had been passionate but brief infatuations, the current position had entered his life for the long haul. The beautiful Emily was a distraction from unpleasant thoughts. Was far more vital than his wife. A bright, passionate, temperamental, though hysterical girl with an unstable psyche. Her tantrums and her fretfulness, stubbornness, by the way, were the cause of their final separation. Camille seemed to know everything, but probably did not care. Every now and then, more for pro forma purposes, she would throw a little scandal when her spouse's best absences became too open and obvious. It seemed to her husband that the woman was most embarrassed not by the fact of cheating, but by the fact that he stopped observing decency. All in all, it seemed impossible for Michael to become attached to a foundling in a matter of minutes. For a woman who, like Camille, had experienced so much on her journey to motherhood, it couldn't have been any other way. She took the baby in her arms, and that was it. The rest of the world ceased to exist for her in that instant, don't you realize? They continued to quarrel. Camille wrote, "This baby boy was sent to me from above for all my suffering. This is not our child, Camille." To Michael, it seemed that he was making a logical argument. To her, however, he seemed delusional. What difference does it make? He needs his mom. He's all alone. The woman screamed. It began to feel like she was running out of air. Heavy breathing could be heard. After a short pause, almost in a whisper, she continued, "It's mine. I'm not giving it to anyone." The scandals that lasted for an hour were replaced by Camille's quiet hysterics. Michael was absolutely confused, not ready for such a thing. They stopped talking about children. He just stopped thinking about it. As it turned out, Camille thought about it all the time and did not let the situation go. "Please, if you love me, if I mean anything to you, in the end, in memory of them, I beg you, let's keep him." It's a low blow. The wife knew it and saved it as a last argument. They never even said their son's name, never spoke of it. What Michael had to do, what to do if the subject of children he left, that pain of loss, still did not fade. In his heart, he never spoke of his son to anyone, ever. It was painful, to the point of tears. Time has not healed that wound, it has not rekindled it. How do you envision it? Michael made an attempt to reach his wife's common sense. He would be our son. What's there to envision? His mother doesn't want him. She left him. Isn't that what I asked you? I interrupted my wife abruptly. How do you envision legalizing a child? He needs papers. It's all worked out. If the baby is not born in a medical organization, and if it was not taken by a licensed doctor, the child is legalized on application. But you need one witness and his testimony. It's not that hard to arrange. It can be arranged. Mother of God. She's already thought of everything and found out everything. I thought to myself. I thought it was an act of desperation, momentary, stretched out over a few days because of her past condition. And this, it turns out, is a deliberate act, thought out. Benjamin was a few days old when he was dropped off. To whom? That's what I called him, Benjamin. Benjamin sounds to me like I'm losing my mind. Or are you? We're clearly at an impasse. I'm going to sleep in the living room and we'll talk about this again tomorrow. Michael went to the bathroom and, standing under the hot shower, pondered what he should do. Maybe, and God be with him. Really, it is not difficult to register the child as his own if everything Camille said is true. Though I don't think she's wrong. You can see that she spent 3 days thinking about it and studying the question. The apartment is like a branch of a children's store with everything in it. But the main thing that Camille didn't seem to care about was absolutely, where did this baby even come from? He must have a mommy, a daddy. And then Michael was struck by lightning. It hit him so hard that he sat down on the edge of the bathtub to avoid falling. It was Emily who had left the baby. It was his baby. She promised to get rid of the baby, but she probably never did. But of course the timing is exactly right. The second blow was even worse than the first. Mother of God. Camille had figured it out, but of course she had said even in her story that his mother didn't want him. Nor did she question the child's origins. Why was he planted there in the first place? I mean, the story goes like this. They called the landline and then the doorbell. So whoever dropped him off knew the phone number of the apartment. It's one more thing to drop off a newborn at an apartment in a luxury building with cameras everywhere. That's what they do with a wet hand. Michael reached for his smartphone, not even bothering to wipe off the water running down it. Straight away he went into the security app. Seems the video had been stored for 7 days. Need to check it out. His hands were shaking. Fingers weren't obeying. Man could barely get to press the right buttons. Found a videotape from that day. A long, tedious wait hid the tape for the right fragment. Here's someone coming in with a basket. You can't see a face or a figure. It's all right, disguised by clothes. But Emily's height is the only thing you can more or less make out. Of course, it's not enough for 100% conclusions, but that's the sum total. The man was frantically thinking. It didn't bother him that he was standing in the middle of the bathroom, all wet, water dripping off him. The cold and excitement made his whole body go round and round. It was late spring, early summer. But sure enough, they were signing that contract when it was. And on June 3rd, Emily announced her pregnancy right on that day. She said she was 8 weeks pregnant. If 8 weeks was early June, then the pregnancy was early April. So labor. But yeah, it's perfect timing. Plus the fact that Emily disappeared right away. Michael's been wanting to break up with the girl for a long time. The further away, the more difficult it was with her. Psyche is very abundant. Anything goes, and it's drama. You never know what reactions to expect from her. At first it was exciting, especially after the cold, calm wife. But as time went on, it got tiresome. Plus these constant scandals for any reason and no reason at all. Especially, of course, soliloquized themes of jealousy and the theme of leaving the family. And this despite the fact that Michael from the very beginning said that he would not leave his wife. At first, the target was kind of okay with that. Anyway, she didn't say anything, but after a while the subject came up more and more often. Then began quarrels and endless clarifications of relations on this subject. In general, Emily did everything to finally tedious. Especially he was infuriated by the pregnancy. She was on birth control pills. He knew it and demanded protection. Said outright that he didn't want kids on the side. That the pregnancy had been planned and orchestrated by Emily was not in doubt. Apparently it was the most cunning plan that her mental abilities allowed. The calculation was, of course, that a man in a childless marriage feels and will go to a pregnant mistress. Naturally, Michael immediately put all points on I and Rose fantasies Emily tried to nip in the bud. Gave money to the girl could get rid of the baby in comfortable conditions, using qualified medical assistance, and threw in a little extra for the first time. It was a huge scandal, but it was to be expected. He never saw the girl again after that. Decided she didn't call, didn't get in touch. And thank God. Of course, deep down he was aware that this was very infantile behavior. And it was worth checking to see if Emily had gotten rid of the baby, to know for sure and be sure. But communicating with her lately had been so hard, so unwilling to listen to what she would say. These endless emotions of Emily's character were just incredibly annoying. Drove Michael to a white-hot frenzy. Now, of course, it was too late to sprinkle ashes on his head. If you put it all together, there's no way around it. It turns out that Benjamin, as Camille called him, Michael's son. Of course, it is possible and necessary to do a DNA examination to confirm paternity. But even now, there is little doubt. Michael, desperate to see the baby. Since he had been soaking wet all this time, he hastily put on a robe and went into the bedroom to his wife and baby. The light was still shining through the door. This time Michael knocked. "Go in," he heard. "You don't have to knock anymore." "Sorry, silly. I wanted to ask, to beg." Michael hesitated. "I can look at Benjamin." Camille held the baby in her arms, rocking it in the chair. With a slight movement, the woman rose and walked toward her husband, who was still standing in the doorway. "Do you want the babies in your arms?" Camille asked. Michael could not utter a word. There was no doubt. The face was just a copy. Even a small dot on the left cheek. There would be a mole on that spot, just like Dad's. The man was desperate to ask the question he was so afraid of the answer to. He was being torn to shreds. He wanted to know for certain if Camille had realized whose son Benjamin was. It was now clear that Michael himself would not abandon the child. How could he leave his son? But did Camille just want to keep the baby, or did she realize everything from the beginning? That was a question that had to be found out. And for sure, before they began to draw up the documents for the son. The only way to find out was to ask it head on. So the man went to the bank. "Camille, please tell me, did you realize the baby was mine?" It would have been hard not to. The woman answered calmly, as if the question were a trivial, mundane one. First of all, look at him only secondly. She stepped away from the man who was holding her son in his arms. She took a piece of paper from the nightstand, unfolded it, read it herself, then unfolded it so Michael could see what was written. "Don't leave your son, please." The handwriting was jagged and uneven. It was as if the message had been written in a hurry. at the last minute. To his shame, the man realized that he did not know Emily's handwriting, so he couldn't confirm or deny her authorship. But there was no doubt even about the meaning of the note. Michael had nothing to say. He stood and moved from foot to foot. He was just incredibly embarrassed in front of his wife. "Thank you." The only thing he could say was, "You'll do the paperwork that I gave birth to him." Of course, it was a terribly difficult day for both spouses. That's why they decided to end all conversations for the day and come back tomorrow to discuss and resolve the issues that had arisen. It was unbelievable how many things the new year brought into the lives of the Thompsonoy couple. In its first hours in the morning, or rather, it was more like lunchtime. But the sleepless night had affected the mode of the day. The couple sat in the kitchen at the dining table. They drank coffee together. The baby stayed in the bedroom just to eat formula milk. He had fallen asleep, and both spouses were now watching him through a video nanny that stood between them in the middle of the table. You took care of everything. The formula, the clothes, the diapers, the crib. Even had a nanny give birth. Awkwardly, the man tried to start a conversation. But how do you imagine it? Naturally, a baby needs a lot of everything. Yes, I understand. The dialogue went from bad to worse. Look, Camille has taken matters into her own hands. I don't need you to apologize and repent. I had no illusions about you being Camille. But it doesn't matter. We have a baby. That's the most important thing right now. I ask you for one thing. I want as soon as possible to get all the proper documents for a newborn, to get official confirmation that Benjamin is my son. And of course, I don't want anyone to ever know the secret of his birth. Of course, I realize Michael's inside out. But a few days after the New Year's vacation ended, Thompson had Benjamin Thompson's birth certificate in hand. The mother's name was Camille Thompson and the father's name was Michael Thompson. Accordingly, it is obvious that the newly minted father canceled his trip to Annatar and sent his deputy. At first, he resisted very much. New Year's holidays, of course. But as soon as Michael admitted that he had a son, the questions were removed. No one was surprised that the pregnancy and childbirth were kept secret until the last. Considering the previous negative experience, it must be said that Michael and Camille were very happy and enjoyed their parenthood, their new status. But there was one thing that bothered them. The couple were playing together as usual, and everyone was flocking to Benjamin, as they called him. Suddenly, even to herself, Camille suddenly asked a question that made it seem like she had struck a blow to their fragile happiness, and it shattered like glass. "Are you sure his mother will never come into our lives? I love him more than life. If she ever shows up and wants him, I'll just die instantly." The young mother was torn. "I'm very afraid of that. Can you prove paternity in court? And I'll confess." This question arose in Michael, but he did not want to talk about it, and once again traumatize his wife. To be honest, I don't know myself what's on her mind. I haven't seen her in a long time. As disgusting as it was, he had to tell Camille the whole story of his relationship with Emily, the boy's biological mother. It was obvious that the woman was not much concerned about her husband's physical infidelity. What puzzled her more was the fact that Emily was notoriously unstable. There was no telling what might be expected of her in the future. Then something must be dealt with at once. What's the solution? Find this Emily of yours and somehow figure out her future plans. How do you envision that? I don't know. But is there any reason to let it go? You think it's for the best? Of course not. But you'll see. I actually told her to get rid of the baby. So what's next? Both spouses are in sad thoughts. Maybe we should go to the head of my security service? Michael began to think out loud. Let them find her, trace her, so at least we'll know where she is. At least some conclusions can be drawn from it. And then dance from that, what do you think? Anyway, I don't have a better idea. Sadly exhaled the woman. Just don't let him in on the details. Please, I promised you. No one will know anything from me, and I'll do my best not to let it go. And from Emily, I hope no one else knows anything. That's definitely not true. She had the baby somewhere, even if she's not home alone. Knowing her, I wouldn't rule that out. The very next day, Michael called the head of security of his firm for a conversation. Called at the door appeared Humans Ethan, a former Special Forces, a veteran of combat operations. The man was characterized not only by outstanding athleticism and physical fitness, but also by intellectual ability. He moved up the career ladder quite quickly. The chief was very pleased with him. "Yes, Ethan, please come in. I'll get right to the point, if you don't mind. I've got a problem, not in the service, but in my personal life. I'd like to bring you in on it." "Sure. Go ahead." "I used to know someone close to me. I hope you understand me correctly." Spetsnazov nodded silently. "So we parted with her not very well already more than half a year ago. But lately I've been feeling a little uneasy." "Not really her. Between you and me, I don't know if she's up to something. You know I've been through enough, Camille. And now we've got a baby on the way. Things have just gotten better and better. In general, I would like you to find this girl, know what she is and how, and what she does now, what she lives. I'd like to observe her from the outside first. Could it be that she's living her life and has completely forgotten about me?" "Okay, I get it. If you allow me, I would take 2 guys to organize everything competently and get the information you are interested in as soon as possible." "Okay, no problem. Just don't fill them in on details they don't need." "Sure, I can go. I'll send all the information on it to my personal email, so we won't use the corporate mail for the task." Ethan nodded and left the office. The boss liked him very much. A quiet, calm donut, left field, bright and, most importantly, a loyal, faithful man of word and deed. A great rarity nowadays. For more than a week, Michael and Camille were constantly on edge. But together they decided there was no point in bothering the humans. He'd tell them when he'd found out. Moreover, such anxiety and impatience of the chief could lead the special officer to some unnecessary thoughts. Why would that be necessary? The spouses tried not to discuss this topic with each other, but from time to time one of them did not hold back. And always the conversation came down to a sense of fear in the face of uncertainty. On Wednesday, a few minutes before the lunch break, Michael's private secretary answered the phone in his office. The woman informed him that the humans had come to see him. Let him come through. Michael's heart sank into his heels. The door opened, and a big man appeared on the threshold. His face did not bode well for good news. He was holding a folder. The chief motioned him to a chair. "Good afternoon. Have a seat." "Hello." "Nothing good, I'm afraid. You're not going to like the news. I could tell by the look on your face and the file." "You tell us, we'll think about it." The man felt the tension. The pressure instantly soared and the pulse cleared. The tachycardia began. So Ethan opened the folder to peek and not miss anything. Emily is now cohabiting, standing with a certain Noah, 30 years of age, 7 grades of education, but 4 priors. One of them was 2 convictions for car theft in his early teens. Thefts could not be proved, apparently, because the 3rd conviction was for theft of a car, and the last conviction is for robbery. So it's been escalating. Guy's got the right look, tattoos, marginalized type. By the way, here's a picture. The warden took one look and marveled at how Emily could have fallen to this. What had happened in 6 months? Not that she used to shine with intelligence and cleverness, but the girl's self-esteem was off the charts. At that time, she wouldn't have fallen for such a scarecrow. She preferred age and wealth. Just like Michael himself. And this Noah without tears cannot look, all in tattoos, low-sold quality Spartacus. To put it bluntly, all his addictions are already reflected on his face, not disfigured by intelligence. Basically, every woman's dream. Nightmare. The chief couldn't help himself. That's not the word. He communicates even worse than he looks. Humans continued. Together with Emily, they lead antisocial lives. She seems to only drink. He also dabbles in psychotropic drugs. But that's not the worst of it. Twice we've caught Emily watching Camille and your son, watching them walk, carpooling outside the house, and following at a distance. But still, a groan escaped Michael's lips, though to himself he was desperately swearing at the mat. Why do you think that is? Any thoughts? God knows. Me and my guys were controlling the situation, to keep him away, and if anything happened, to prevent trouble by force. I still have William. Your guys are out at the same time. Chief nodded. Thank you. In his mind, he was frantically racing thoughts about how to do this. I need to think hard. A picture of this one, Noah. Please leave it at the start of work tomorrow as well. I'm expecting you today. We'll discuss this situation further. And of course, call William to keep an eye on Camille and the baby. I think they were just going for a walk today, so they won't be outside for long. Okay, I don't want to call and ask them to stay home. It'll just scare them. That was the end of it. For the rest of the day, Michael couldn't concentrate and constantly thought about what Emily needed. If she just wanted to make sure that the baby was okay, that the couple honored the mother's request and took the baby in and didn't abandon him, then one visit would be enough. She would have looked from afar, and that would have been it. And here twice in 1 week. There's no telling how many times she came before she was observed. As difficult as it was, the man decided to tell Camille everything. He realized that it would scare her a lot. But in the first place, she must know in order to realize the seriousness of the situation. In the second place, enough withholding information from his wife. He had already made a lot of mistakes in his life. Stop adding to it. Thirdly, Camille understood women more and could think of something smarter, more subtle. Still, the current situation demanded action on their part. It couldn't be left to chance. Having finished all the most urgent tasks he couldn't delegate, Michael headed home. As they shopped together, put Benjamin to bed, and went to the kitchen, the man decided that there was no more time to delay the conversation. As much as he didn't want to believe it. Humans came to see me today with a report. With a heavy heart, he repeated his subordinate's words and watched his wife's face fall with each new unpleasant fact. When he had finished, Camille commanded and gripped the countertops with her fingers as hard as she could. Anyway, I said I'd think about it until tomorrow morning. I wanted to consult with you so I wouldn't make a mess of things. Camille remained silent and stared fixedly in front of her. The man did not want to interrupt her reverie. I am very afraid. The wife interrupted the silence. Not for herself, for our baby. I understand, me too. Michael took her hand. I think it's advisable that you don't leave the house without humans. I'll ask him to be your bodyguard for a while. At least I'm sure he'll be able to protect you. But with Emily, I don't know what to do. Do you have any thoughts on that? The woman's been thinking. I think you should meet with her and ask her directly what she wants from us. I don't think she's suddenly got maternal feelings. They're instincts, not awake as I see it, Camille reasoned. If she saw her new boyfriend is interested in money, we should offer her a payoff. Not for nothing, of course. I suggest we retroactively draw up a surrogacy agreement. It'll give us protection in case they want to blackmail us and extort money. And in case Benjamin and any of us are followed again, we can not only defend ourselves, but we can go to law enforcement. Now, this lady can say she's a mother. Of course, there will be questions for her too, like how the child ended up in our possession. But we're not safe either. There will be no less questions to us in this case. If we have a service contract with a subsequent waiver of rights to the baby, Emily will become an outsider woman who worked for us. She'll have no rights, no recourse. Look, that sounds genius. It is. So far, it only sounds smooth in my rosy fantasies. I need to check with a lawyer to make sure I got it right when I was looking online for ways to solve our problems. Plus, it's possible that this grieving mom won't accept our offer. Although it is unlikely, probably reasoned the spouse Michael allowed, and in general, we have another trump card up our sleeve. If the young lady refuses, we can still come from the side of the guy Noah. He will definitely not refuse freebies. The kid's a stranger to him. What's in it for him? She rode, got sick, then died. And people like him always need money. All right, then tomorrow morning first thing, Humans is coming to see me, and I'm with him, making arrangements for your security. But yes, and call Jacob at once. Let him hustle, and immediately apply all the legal subtleties. Think everything over and arrange with the notary, my wife suggested. Yes, I will, don't worry. First thing in the morning, as agreed, Ethan and Michael met. The subordinate came at once, as agreed the day before. He knocked on the office a few minutes after the boss arrived. Even the secretary was not even at the workplace yet, as both men showed up early today. The start of the workday. Their first order of business was to arrange security for the chief's wife and child. I trust you, but I can't help but speak from both of them. A hair mustn't fall. There's no telling what else Emily and that young man of hers will do. I have to be sure. I've spoken to my wife so I can leave the house as soon as I need to. Did she call you? Here's her number, just in case. You'll get in touch with her and work out a schedule. I've been released from my primary job for the time being, of course, on the word of an officer. Michael, Benjamin, and Camille will be fine. It must be said that the chief was treated with the utmost kindness. He was a well-mannered and fair man. He was not an arrogant man. All the old-timers of the company remembered well the tragedy that the chief and his wife had to go through. Of course, everyone sympathized with the grief and rejoiced heartily when Benjamin was finally born. After the meeting with Ethan, Michael contacted William, one of the two guys who were already a bit immersed in the chief's personal problems, and called him over. When he arrived, explained to the guy that it was required to go with the chief for backup. Of course, Michael planned to talk to Emily alone, but that was what William was for, to isolate, if anything, Noah and anyone else who happened to be near the target. But it wouldn't be unnecessary for personal safety either. When he arrived at the address humans had provided, the man was shocked. How could it be that 6 months had taken such a toll on his ex-lover? Emily and Noah lived in a dormitory, rented an apartment. As it turns out, dorms come in many forms. And so the couple's residence was the worst of the possible options already bought. The natives put on the worst of thoughts. Michael walked and could not drive away the thought of what a blessing it was that she did not keep the baby and did not raise it herself in these conditions. Thank you so much for bringing the baby to the door of his apartment and for being smart enough to make sure there was someone at home. I could have done a lot worse thinking about the possible fate or death of my son. The man tried to chase it away, but it didn't work. The stairs and the corridor of the dormitory were a depressing sight. One could hang an axe on a carenya. All around there were people of absolutely marginal appearance. Some of them had already lost their human form. One could not even reach his room, lying right in the corridor, relaxing after a tedious rest, with horror and disdain stepping over his body. Michael moved further down the hallway, barely able to contain his gagging. It was hard to put into words the confusion that had engulfed the man for a little over half a year. That's how long it took the girl to go from expensive restaurants to a variety of expensive gifts. A rented apartment downtown to this place. Worse, she'd lived here pregnant. I didn't want to know what she ate and how she generally treated her health and the health of her baby. Thank God, according to the results of all the tests done, Benjamin checked everything, did a complete body check. The boy was perfectly healthy. No diseases or abnormalities the medics did not reveal. Finally, the men came to the right door. Michael knocked. There was no answer. William began to drum hard on the door with his fist and heavy army pepper with all his might. This is the kind of crowd, he explained, that you have to knock to the point of knocking. No one here responds to your intelligent knocking. The young man was right. There was a sound from behind the door. Someone was clearly heading for the door. The door opened. In front of the men stood the very same Noah, his face quite characteristically displaying the displeasure of an earlier attempt at severe alcohol intoxication the day before. The sight was even sadder in person than in the photograph. The guy was standing in his underwear, which made his puny body and the tattoos on it look even more wretched. Turns out the camera was flattered by Noah's face. Too, he looked decidedly worse in real life. The room behind the man's back was about 15 meters at most, so everything was in plain sight. Dirt, mess, and a woman lying log on the bed. Her face was not visible, but a distinctive tattoo of a Celtic ornament was visible on her arm. Without a doubt, it was Emily. By prior arrangement, William immediately took Noah under his white arms and led the way. He didn't even resist. Apparently, he hadn't had time to wake up completely, and the party the night before had been too successful. Suppressing his squeamishness, Michael entered the stable and closed the door behind him. It was hard to imagine that what now lay on the bed had once been a beautiful nymph. Now it was an utterly desolate station wistfulness. Feeling disgusted, Michael nevertheless reached out to rasp the former mistress. She was lying in tank top underwear on a bed that hadn't been washed in, judging by her appearance. A year. The man was experiencing cognitive dissonance. It couldn't be his Emily. It couldn't be possible. The woman opened her eyes and slammed them shut in surprise. What are you doing here? Given the body's appearance, it was amazing that she could think so fast. I need to talk to you. Get up. either from surprise or she really wasn't that bad at assessing her surroundings. Emily came to her senses quickly enough and stood up, pulling on her sweatpants. "Why didn't you tell me about the baby?" Michael got right down to business. "I did, but you told me I had to get rid of it. So we made a deal that you would get rid of the baby and not leave it to drop it under my door. You were trying to make a deal with me. I didn't negotiate anything with you. You threw me away like an old, unwanted toy and had no interest in my life." Emily began to wind up in a manner peculiar to her earlier, and at once all the emotions were bubbling up and all the indignation began to pour out in a stormy stream. "On a man. Okay, I get it. In your note, you asked me to take care of your son. I took him into my family. Then why are you following my wife and son? I miss him very much. Then why did you give him away? How could I keep him? Didn't you notice my life had changed?" "I did." "Then what do you want?" "I want to see my son now." "It's not your son now. It's my and my wife's child." "Do I have the proper papers?" "Yes, we'll see about that." The woman's eyes flashed with a very unpleasant, even scary light. "It's ridiculous to threaten me in your position, but I'll admit that what I did to you wasn't quite right." "Correct you call it, just not correct." Emily went on a screaming rampage. "You left me pregnant? It hasn't changed at all. Same lack of ability to dialogue and tendency to overreact. And she's just as self-involved as ever. It's like I had the idea not to get rid of the baby and not tell me about the prolongation of the pregnancy. I thought Michael would call it whatever you want." He deliberately did not want to argue and spoke in the quietest and calmest tone possible. "I can offer you monetary compensation for your son." "I don't want money. I want my child back." "I can see how you don't want money at all," said the man, looking around the room. "And it certainly shows how much you need your son. You just do everything to get him back, and you've done everything not to lose him." I guess she had nothing to say to that. "Oh, my beauty, don't be ridiculous. You, me, and anyone with eyes can see the miserable position you are in. You have no alternatives. Listen to me carefully. You only have 3 choices. 1, you try to take my baby away from me by force and crime and go to juvie with your new friend. He's used to it. But you are not completely down yet, and you will be pleasantly surprised by the success you will have with the old bunny. The 2nd, you try to solve the problem within the legal framework, but I tell you right away that there is no chance. I have all the documents in hand, right down to the birth certificate, where your name is not. Plus I have the connections and finances to sue, and you don't. You try to squeeze pity from the now popular women's charities. They'll know right away that you dropped off a baby. What's more, you left one newborn baby in a stairwell in winter with no assurance that it would be found. Now, you don't know that. But for such actions there is a special composition, and in the criminal law Article 125 of the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation. You can read it at your leisure. The 3rd and your last option is to sign a contract on the provision of services as a surrogate mother, the refusal of the child, and get a round sum. I'm offering a market value of $1,510,000. I'm telling you with every 24 hours. What are you stalling for an answer? The price will go down $1,000, but you'll pick the right one yourself. Or shall we call your new young man? I think he'll definitely choose. That's right. Michael struggled to finish his monologue. It was carefully constructed, thought out, prepared by him and his wife. It's a terribly uncomfortable feeling that he's threatening someone, but the mother of his child. On the other hand, she's clearly a threat to his son's safety, and there's not much to choose. I get it. I just want the money in cash, no problem, in any form or currency. Anything you want. But of course, only after you sign all the necessary signatures. When can I do that? Just a second. Michael pulled out his cell phone and dialed Jacob. Good afternoon. We're all set. We can come over today. Okay, thank you, we can do it today, he said, addressing Emily. The woman began to hurriedly pack. Don't forget your passport. I won't forget. I'm not coming back here again. Can you make sure Noah doesn't come with us? If necessary, they'll stay with him and make sure he doesn't follow us. Emily nodded gratefully. Look, while you're packing anyway, can you answer the question of why you left the baby in the first place? Stupid, because I couldn't bring myself to get rid of it. Scared. What about me? I didn't tell him because I'm not only stupid, I'm proud. But let's say, why did you decide to keep it for me? Why should I raise him here among these local ghouls? By the way, how did you end up here? Your money ran out very quickly. I couldn't pay the rent. I sold the gold first, then the rest. Thanks to Noah. He took me in despite my potbelly. Michael was tormented by a question he was afraid to ask himself. Deep down, he was afraid to know the answer, but he couldn't help asking it. Did you take care of yourself when you were pregnant? Didn't drink? Didn't use anything? What kind of nonsense is that? Am I stupid? Oh, he thought to himself. I won't ask any more questions, or I'll find out how stupid you are, and I'll be very scared for my son. So, how much longer do we have to wait for you? Okay, I'm almost done. I won't wear makeup, of course. I didn't have enough on my battered face to be sure. What a nightmare. Poor girl. Humanly speaking, I feel sorry for her. Thoughts were born in the man's mind. Before leaving the room, Michael sent William a message. Noah stays with you. We'll supervise. We're off. After receiving a one-word reply, okay, Michael and Emily left the notary's office. The case went smoothly, without excesses. They arrived quickly, signed all the documents. Emily received the money, carefully counted it, and left. The papers she signed, she didn't even read them. Talk about how much she really needs her son. On the occasion of the successful completion of the case, Michael stopped by his wife's favorite bakery. Took their traditional holiday Napoleon cake. At home, over the cake, he told Camille everything in detail and gave it to her. Do I have to put the documents in the safe? Yes, absolutely. Camille was silent, not thinking I was paranoid. Please, but let Ethan walk with us for a while. I'm more comfortable with him. Actually, I was going to suggest that myself. We're relying on the word of a woman whose word doesn't mean much. And that friend of hers, too. There's no telling what he might do. You should have seen him in person. It's worse than that picture. Well, she dumped him, ran off with the money. So it's a good idea to be on the safe side, I guess. That was the end of the conversation. They began to enjoy each other's company and watch their favorite boy sleeping sweetly. Benjamin strengthened their relationship. They had changed a lot with his arrival. Michael became attentive to his wife again, pampering her, taking care of her. And Camille, when she freed herself from her cocoon, in which she had fallen in love with herself, became again the woman in whom her husband had fallen in love. The family idyll, unfortunately, ended a few days later, before it could begin. In fact, it was traditionally Emily who ruined it by calling Michael, "I need money," from an unknown number. It was an ultimatum, unambiguously. You're not confused on the form, are you? And mother. Exactly, I'm the mother. I'm your son's mother, she started yelling into the phone. As recently as 3 days ago, you signed a retroactive waiver in your own hand, my dear. So the mother of my son is my wife. I'm hanging up. Please don't call me again. You got money from me, and you're not going to get any more. That asshole took my money. The woman's scream was getting louder. From the tone of her voice, she was becoming hysterical. Your new boyfriend is your own fault. Why did you go to him? He found me again. He found me at a friend's house. Emily, choking back tears. That's not my problem. One more call, and I'll file a police report. Goodbye. As Michael took the phone away from his ear to press the disconnect button, he heard the woman start sprinkling insults with threats. He immediately blocked the number the call came from. That's why he immediately dialed Human's number. Ethan, be careful. I don't know how serious this is, but Emily just borrowed and threatened me. Please don't tell Camille. She doesn't need to worry. Hearing from the SWAT officer that all incoming information was understood and accepted, Michael hung up the phone and exhaled. In general, he did not believe that his former mistress was capable of something serious. As it turned out, for nothing, the man is so not. And Psyche, it's a time bomb. Nothing foreshadowed the trouble that was to follow. By the end of the working day, the man had already forgotten about the threats, made plans for tonight, thought about what would be delicious to buy for dinner. He thought that it would be nice to fly somewhere warm in a few months. Benjamin will grow up a little. By that time, it will be possible to fly with him, so that the child could breathe sea air and bask in the sun in their climate. The sun for many more months is not even a dream. Immersed in his own thoughts, he walked from the office to the car and did not look around at all. It was only when Emily came within arm's length of him that he noticed her. But it was too late. Completely unprepared for a confrontation, the man was taken aback by the effect of surprise. Emily was shouting loudly, and suddenly he saw in her hand something that gave a metallic glow in the light of the street lamp. A knife. He only had time to think about it before he felt an unbearable pain in his stomach. The man began to settle to the ground. Strangely enough, the pain helped him concentrate and focus. It was only then that he heard what the inadequate one had screamed. That's it for you. You've ruined my whole life. You scum die. That's all he could hear clearly. Further on, his consciousness began to shift, and her voice began to sound farther and farther away. He could no longer make out the words. His consciousness was leaving the man. Michael came to himself in the ambulance. A doctor in a blue peculiarity bent over him. The wounded man tried to speak so that his wife could be called and warned of the danger. But he couldn't say anything intelligible. He tried again, but all he got out of his chest was a groan. "Man, you can't talk. Stay down. We'll be at the hospital soon. Be patient." The ambulance doctor commanded. In that last phrase, he felt compassion for the victim. Michael felt that his whole body ached, that he was terribly cold, shaking with chills. At this point, he lost consciousness again. Meanwhile, of course, neither Ethan nor Camille had any idea what had happened. They were traditionally walking in the park near the house with Benjamin, waiting for Daddy. Usually they took a nap at this time for the second time in the day, so that the baby could get some fresh air. At the same time, they would meet Michael, and all of them would come home together. Emily, too, had become quite familiar with the habits of mother and child and wanted to use this to her advantage. Her plan was to attack the hated wife of her former lover. She too deserved revenge. According to Emily, the main target was the child. The mad woman wanted to get it back for herself. If someone had stopped her at that moment and asked her why she wanted her son, she wouldn't have been able to answer that question. Unfortunately, an abundant psyche and a recent overindulgence in alcohol and drugs had brought Emily to a point of no return. There was nothing but an overpowering sense of hatred in her mind. Maybe somewhere deep down, she realized that the culprit of all the worst that had happened to her was herself. But such a realization and acceptance requires tremendous fortitude. Unfortunately, Emily did not have that. Therefore, all this resentment, hatred, feeling of pity, and injustice towards herself only accumulated inside the woman, and in a critical situation found an outlet outside. Forbidding crimes with such unbridled rage and hatred. A logical, sad ending. Despite all the psychosis and the rage and anger inside, the actions on the outside were well thought out, planned. Emily was well aware that there was not much time. At any moment a call could have been made to report that Michael had been attacked. Then she would lose the chance of a surprise attack. That was why she acted as swiftly as possible. While observing Camille's walks with the stroller, Emily had obviously found out that their favorite place was a small alley with evergreen trees in the center of the park. That was where she wanted to attack. First of all, the speed at which the woman with the stroller was moving was maximally reduced there, and secondly, there was vegetation on the trees there, from behind which it was possible to take cover. Camille was walking the stroller and was thinking about her own thoughts. A few steps behind was Ethan. His concentration was at its maximum. He never let his guard down. It was thanks to his professionalism and sense of caution. The mother and child were unhurt. Humans spotted the unwanted character in the bushes before Emily noticed him. She had not at all expected to see reinforcements. Earlier, when she had followed Camille with Benjamin, the guards had kept a low profile, even though they were present. Emily's unprofessional eye, of course, had failed then to pick out the men and separate their unintentional presence nearby from the occasional vacationer or passerby. Ethan, therefore, had an incomparably greater advantage in the situation. When Crazy left her hiding place and ran towards Camille, Ethan was ready for the attack and rushed forward. The only thing he couldn't know and consider was that the woman was naturally mad and couldn't stop. Ethan expected that blocking the attacker would be enough, and that would prevent trouble. But the psychosis was accompanied by the manifestation of enormous physical strength, the presence of which no one could have foreseen and expected from the fragile Emily. That is why not without difficulty. But the woman was able to free herself from Ethan's huge paws, literally slip out and continue her movement. Camille was stunned with shock. For Michael's unhappy wife, everything was happening like a slow-motion video. only her own movements were also constrained, as if in a dream. This was the worst dream of all, a nightmare. His Camille moved herself, toward her attacker, toward her forward-facing hand with the knife she had suddenly pulled from her jacket pocket. Without thinking of herself, she thought of Benjamin, that the psychopath might have harmed him. She wanted to protect the stroller where the baby was sleeping peacefully at that moment. At the last second, Ethan came up behind Emily, spun her around on top of him, and hit her arm to dislodge the knife. The luck of the draw was that Emily was holding the knife the wrong way, so it was easy to knock it out. Despite the monstrous, even paradoxical force with which she had clawed at it, Ethan was breaking the girl's arms behind her back. Though it wasn't easy, and laid her on the ground to quell her desperate resistance. Emily continued to try to free herself, and only then did the SWAT officer shout, addressing Camille, "Help. The handcuffs are in her left pocket." This shout helped the woman wake up and rush to Ethan. To help, Emily lashed out with all available force, and despite the SWAT officer's training, his tremendous physical abilities. Holding her down was not easy. Camille arrived in time, pulled out the handcuffs, and helped to restrain the girl's hands with them. It was good that Ethan was prepared for any outcome and had prepared himself. He'd brought a toolkit for every eventuality. "Oh my God, thank you." Those were Camille's first words when she finally realized that the attempt was over and the baby wasn't even awake and was still drinking peacefully in the stroller. The first thing she did was run over and check on her son. Ethan was actually sitting on Emily's back, as the psychopath had no intention of giving up, despite his restrained arms. It was only at this point that she raised her voice and began shouting vile, disgusting threats, both in form and content. Since it was already an act of powerlessness, Ethan and Camille tried to ignore it. They did, until Emily said, "I've had my revenge anyway. Your hubby's dead. I killed him." It was impossible to ignore. It didn't look like the girl was lying. "Ethan, I'm calling the police." Camille called the SWAT. "They'll come get her, book her, and then we'll find out what she did to Michael." That's what they decided. Camille quickly dialed 02 and called the squad, meekly explaining that in the city park on her and her young son made an attempt on her. Just 10 minutes later, the entire park was lit up with flashers, all the police cars had moved in, and an ambulance had arrived to check the victims for injuries. Camille could not exhale. She needed to know what had happened to her husband. She did not move away from the wheelchair. Fear for her son was still lingering. The EMTs were forced to examine the woman outside the car. Camille flatly refused to leave her seat and move away from the stroller with her son, even a few meters. After the paramedics, an officer approached her. The police officer who had previously spoken to Ethan. While Camille was being examined by the doctors, she had no time to ask a question before she blurted out, "Please. This woman said she killed my husband. He's not answering his cell phone. Is there any way to find out what happened to him? Your husband was found by a passerby who called an ambulance. Now, I'm told he's undergoing surgery. The doctors are doing everything they can. It's a serious injury." The policeman compared the two similar cases and immediately realized that the attackers were one. By then, the whole department knew about this urban lunatic. "I can go there." The policeman looked sympathetically at the woman who could hardly stand on her feet from the shock of what had happened. "Let me drive you myself. I don't care to get explanations from the ambulance staff who brought your husband to the hospital. And while we are waiting for the brigade, you will also tell me under the record that it was good here." The woman was silent. The young man continued, "I'm sorry, but I need your written testimony in order to compare it with the testimony of your defense counsel and already interrogate the attacker, having the whole picture." "Okay," Camille agreed. They drove to the hospital instantly, as the blinkers were on. The first thing the woman wanted to do was to get a handle on her husband's condition, but she didn't have time. The policeman was ahead of the woman, cowering with her son in his arms, and watched as the man talked to the nurse on duty. He came back with a smile. Everything was all right. The surgery is over. Life is no longer in danger. We were able to isolate and stop the bleeding. A groan of relief was the only thing Camille could produce in response to the news. The tension seemed to subside and her strength left her. The woman almost collapsed on the iron seat behind her. After about an hour, the policeman drove away. Went for the report and each Camille at Camille's word and getting her signature on the report. But immediately Ethan arrived. All the while he was being held at the scene. How was Michael? He rushed straight to the woman. The operation was over. It's clear he's going to make it. Thank God. Then why are you here after the surgery? They're going to keep him in the ICU anyway, and they don't let anyone in there. Do you need a ride home? No, thank you very much. I can't leave here. I don't want to go home. Okay, the man did not impose his opinion and left the wife of the chief. 10 minutes later, he reappeared and almost commanded, "Let's go." Camille was so tired that she didn't even bother to resist. Ethan saw how hard it was for her and suggested that I take Benjamin in my arms. Don't worry, I know how to handle little ones. After the lives humans had saved today, she and the baby didn't have to doubt him. Turns out he had stepped aside to arrange for a separate room for Camille and the baby on the floor where Michael was lying. There was even a crib in the room. Fantastic. Also, a nurse came in a few minutes later. Let's give you a vitamin drip to keep your body strong. Camille was so tired she didn't resist anything. And when she was put on the IV, just immediately passed out from fatigue. When the woman woke up, she saw that there was a pile of bags in the ward. Judging by the names of the stores, on them it was all the necessary things that the baby and Camille herself might need. She thought gratefully once again of Umansich. Right now there was no one but him to take care of them. Checking that her son also continued to sleep peacefully, she fell asleep too. The next 4 months were very stressful for both Camille and Michael. He was undergoing a difficult rehabilitation after the injury, recovering his strength. In addition, the couple had to testify an endless number of times. 3 and more months lasted the investigation, when the couple was constantly pulled, then together, then one by one. Then the trial took place. Despite certain deviations, Emily was found sane and was sentenced to a long term of imprisonment. Despite the pain Emily had caused, they still felt sorry for her. Unhappy, in fact, the girl was happy. If I may say so, only one thing the spouses knew for sure, that in the near foreseeable future, the woman will not appear on their doorstep and will not be able to cause anyone but no harm. The couple decided to celebrate their son's small anniversary with a bang. The boy was 6 months old. It seemed to them that as a reward for what they had gone through, they could afford a holiday. At the party, which took place in the couple's country house, many friends of the family's buddies were invited. But the special guest for them was the Humans. The Thompsons decided to surprise him as a token of endless gratitude. During the celebration, the couple stood up together and asked for the floor. We are all very happy to see everyone at our little family celebration. But there is one man who received a special offering today. It is because of him that our family exists and our little son is alive and well. We would like to propose a toast to the health of Humans, Ethan. The guests applauded and murmured. Camille took the floor. Ethan, thank you so much for everything. I'll never get tired of thanking you. Michael and I thought about it and remembered that with all the turmoil we had been in lately, we had never had our son baptized. We'd like you to be his godfather, if you don't mind. The commando rose slowly from his seat. I'd be honored. A raucous shout of happiness, cheering and applause filled the house. For the first time in a long time, Camille and Michael felt calm and peaceful.